and he shows up at 9 o'clock in the morning. I don't know what time you leave New York to get to Williamsburg at 9 o'clock in the morning, but it's pretty early. Have any of you seen his picture? I mean, you would not know it by his pigmentation, but he is partially African American, and for reasons he explains, he has more than in the picture there, much more than that. An afro about like this, and a very young-looking man. So my wife is shocked when he comes to the door. She's expecting a gentleman in a coat and tie and very discreet, and here's this wild-eyed character. Well, he came in, and for 3 hours we had one of the most fascinating and wonderful conversations I've ever had, and it was all over the map. And he's getting ready to leave, and I said to him, "What is your storyline?" He said, "Storyline?" I said, "Well, you work for the New Yorker. Aren't you writing an article?" He said, "No, I'm writing a book." "Oh, what's the book about?" "It's going to be something like my previous book." "What was your previous book?" "Tipping Point." Well, I'd never heard of it. So he leaves. Several days later, almost like Bob did, I walk into a bookstore, and right in front is Tipping Point. Oh, better bestseller. Wish I'd have known that. I'd kept Malcolm Gladwell. Might have given him lunch. I'd spent some more time talking to him. Well, we stayed on the phone, did a lot of emails as he developed the book. But I'm going to use Tipping Point and Blink as sort of the structure for what I'm going to talk about this morning, because there's a lot of scientific writing behind both of these. So it's a context, and particularly Tipping Point is a context for the world we live in when we make decisions. So what's in Tipping Point? Well, the first thing is nonlinear dynamics. How many know what nonlinear dynamics is? I don't find many audiences that do. I'm a history major, so if I can understand it, you should have no difficulty. The universe really has two classes of systems, or two phenomena: linear and nonlinear. Linear is what we learn in 7th grade science, and it's basically Newtonian physics, cause and effect, velocity, mass, etc. If you were educated in the years I was, when anybody talked about problems that were not linear, they dismissed them as a subclass that linear solutions would apply to. Don't worry about them, there aren't very many. There's no way to put a percentage on it, but the world and all that's in it is basically nonlinear. The linear problems are small. In a linear system, an event at this point will always lead to the same outcome downstream or later in time. So if you run an experiment, or you do this, you probe the system, put energy into the system here, you always get the same output. A nonlinear system, you never know. You can do something at this point and get a proportional outcome downstream, or you get something completely disproportional in a different direction. The universe itself is nonlinear. To us, that doesn't make a lot of difference, because the time horizon, we don't know what's going to happen to the universe. You hear speculation, but it's billions upon billions of years in the future. So when we launch rocket ships, we go to the moon, and we try to go to other planets, Newtonian physics works quite well because this phenomena is so far out in front. But other nonlinear phenomena have much shorter time horizons, and the one that most often is used as an example is weather. The weather time horizon is 3 to 5 days in advance. No matter what anybody tells you, we will never be able to predict weather any further in the future than 3 to 5 days. Now, you can talk about trends. It could be colder in December than it was in July, but no ability to predict what the weather is going to be on the 3rd of December. The range is all over the map. It's because there's not a cause and effect, but cascading effects. It's like billiard balls or pool. One thing leads to another, and it becomes uncomputable. You cannot compute the interactions. You've probably heard some of this but didn't recognize it, because the popular name is chaos theory. And if you're interested in reading this, probably James Gleick's book, Chaos, written sometime back in the 80s, is probably the best place to start. But it's where the idea of the butterfly effect came from. What is the butterfly effect? Anybody remember?
Butterfly flaps.
Yeah, butterfly flaps its wings. What happens?
Affects the wind in the United States.
Yeah.
Or at least building.
In fact, you have just affected the weather. As you did this, you've just affected the weather. Because you created little bits of wind that go all over the place. Obviously, there is no ability to ever track that. Because you'd have to track every butterfly, everybody performing Madam Butterfly on stage, all of the birds, me flapping my arms here, all of these as they interact. Well, clearly it's not possible. Now, the gentleman who discovered this was Edward Lorenz. And he was a meteorologist trained in the Second World War, came back and was up in one of the schools in New England, and he had one of the first computers called the Royal Maccabee. And he put 12 variables in this computer that represented weather, and he used to get these printouts that in the printouts it looked like it had the attributes of weather. Well, one night he wanted to run this experiment again, but he was in a little bit of a hurry. So he put all of the figures in, but he only went to the third decimal, or the third position behind the decimal instead of the fourth. So 1/1000th of a difference in each data point he put in. Went to get a cup of coffee. He came back. He looked at the results, and it was completely different than anything he'd ever seen before. Something wrong. I put the wrong data in. Checked the data, all correct. Checked, had the technicians come up, nothing wrong with the machine. It finally dawned on him was weather is subject to initial conditions. Initial conditions that are almost unmeasurable, wave your hand, will change it as these things cascade over time. And so he wrote an article about it in a scientific magazine for meteorologists. Went nowhere until some mathematicians, almost 7 years, including Soviet mathematicians, came across it and realized the impact of this. Now, when you grasp it, it seems so simple, but this is one of the most important scientific discoveries that there's ever been. But most of us know very little about it. So when you hear chaos theory, they're really talking about nonlinear dynamics in a more popular fashion. Something came afterwards, though, that was supposed to be a little bit more modern, called complexity theory. And maybe some of you have read some of this, maybe not. If you haven't, a writer equally adept and interesting to read as Malcolm Gladwell wrote Complexity, and his name is Mitch Waldrop, W-A-L-D-R-U-P. Complexity is based on nonlinear dynamics. It has a tendency to look at ecological and biological systems more than other systems, that it covers all systems. But it talks about emergent behavior. That when you have more than two, or two will do it, but anytime you have three or more elements in a system, the interaction will produce behavior that none of the, as you looked at any of the individuals, you would never think was there. So you get this interaction that produces this behavior. Probably the easiest thing to think of are flocking birds. Birds flocks, and they have this beautiful movement through the air. What causes that? The individual bird, what is it? In fact, if you look at it, the flocks will turn, and there's no ability for any kind of decision-making for this to happen. What takes place? I'll describe something later called boids in artificial life that gives you an idea. So this is part of the context. What we also realize, though, is there's something called general system theory. Ludwig von Bertalanffy. Anybody read his book? Okay. These are things that the average person wouldn't read that I'll urge you to read. Ludwig wrote in the mid-1970s, in general system theory, he said all systems, every system in the universe has common properties. So whether it's the mind,